I need you to picture this house with me
We
for a
need to
second.
talk.
A
There's been
huge
a
mansion
development.
sitting
What
alone on a
kind
hill,
of development?
all lit up from the outside like it's proud of itself. But inside, it feels like a prison. And somewhere in the middle of all that fake
Sir, there's
gold and
something
marble,
urgent you need to
there's a
address
tired woman named
immediately.
Amara, wiping the same counter for the third time because her boss likes to see people suffer. By 2:47 a.m., Amara's feet were burning. She had been on them since 6 in the morning the previous day, scrubbing floors that would be dirty again by noon, polishing glasses that no one would thank her for, and keeping quiet in a
We need
house
to
where
talk.
silence was
There's
the
been
only
a
way to stay
development.
safe.
What kind of
The Mafia
development?
boss, Lorenzo De Luca, liked to say she owed him her life. But what he really meant was that he owned her nights, her mornings, and every
Sir,
breath in
there's something
between.
urgent you need to address
One mistake,
immediately.
one broken plate, one answer he didn't like, and his voice would turn sharp and low, the kind of voice that made the air itself feel dangerous. Amara was tall, with deep brown skin and tired eyes that had once been bright before this house swallowed them. She had come from far away, another continent, another life, chasing a simple dream. Send money home, get her little brother through school, maybe one day open a small cafe with a blue door and a bell that rang when people came in smiling. But in this house, the only bell that rang was the one Lorenzo pressed when he wanted something done faster. He never learned her full story. To him, she was just the maid, a replaceable shadow moving silently between his expensive furniture. The kitchen was the only place where Amara could breathe a little. The smell of coffee grounds and dish soap wrapped around her like a thin blanket, not warm enough to comfort her, but better than nothing. She washed the last plate from the boss's late-night poker game, her hands red and wrinkled from hot water. The men were still in the other room, their laughter drifting through the walls, loud, drunk, reckless. Every time they laughed too loud, Amara felt a small tremor in her chest, because loud men with money and guns were never just laughing at jokes. Someone always paid for their fun. Her back ached and her eyelids felt heavy, but she didn't dare lean against the counter for too long. Lorenzo had cameras everywhere. He liked to rewind the security footage like it was his own private show. If he saw her resting, even for 10 seconds, there would be a punishment tomorrow. More work, less food, maybe a threat whispered in her ear about sending her back where she came from with nothing. He was a master at making kindness sound like a favor he never had to give. Still buried under all that fear, there was something in Amara that refused to die. Every night when she had a second to herself, she would close her eyes and imagine her little brother Malik sitting at a wooden desk, pencil in hand, school uniform too big for his small shoulders. She'd picture his smile the day she left, how he hugged her like he believed without question that she was strong enough to change their lives. That memory was the one thing Lorenzo couldn't touch. It was her secret armor. Outside, the city was quiet. Thick clouds covered the moon, and the long driveway that led up to the mansion was empty, stretching out like a dark tongue. The guards were half asleep in their chairs, guns resting lazy across their laps. This late at night, nobody rang the bell. Nobody came to this house uninvited. You either belonged to Lorenzo's world or you stayed far away from it. Amara rinsed the last glass and placed it upside down on the drying rack. Her fingers trembled a little. She told herself it was just the cold water, but she knew better. It was exhaustion wrapped in fear, the kind that sinks into your bones. As she turned off the faucet, the old wall clock above the fridge ticked loudly in the silence. 2:59 a.m., she thought, just for a second, about sitting on the small wooden stool in the corner and closing her eyes. 10 minutes, that's all she wanted. 10 minutes where no one shouted her name like it was an order. Instead, she pulled the stool back under the counter and straightened her apron. If there was one thing she had learned, it was this. Surviving in that house meant being more disciplined than the men who thought they were in control. They had guns. She had patience. They had money. She had endurance. They had power. She had something they couldn't see, a heart that refused to become like theirs. The silence in the mansion changed all of a sudden, so softly that most people wouldn't have noticed. The air felt tighter, like it was holding its breath. Amara frowned, unsure why her neck prickled with that familiar warning. She glanced toward the hallway that led to the front door, listening. Nothing. Just the faint buzz of the refrigerator and the muffled echo of a late poker joke from the other room. She told herself she was imagining it. Then at exactly 3:00 a.m., the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the silence, one clear, steady chime that didn't belong in this world of secrecy and shadows. Amara froze, her hands instinctively clutching the edge of the counter. No one rang the bell at this hour. Not delivery men, not guests, not even the police. Here people called ahead. They were announced. They were expected. This was something else. The guards cursed in surprise, their chairs scraping against the floor outside. Heavy footsteps rushed along the front hallway. Amara's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. For a second, she thought about hiding in the pantry, just disappearing into the shelves of canned food and pasta. But Lorenzo hated curious maids, and if something big was happening, he would want everyone in their place, ready to serve, ready to obey. She forced herself to move, stepping quietly out of the kitchen and into the side corridor that gave her a partial view of the front entrance. From there, she could see the massive double doors, the guards flanking them, hands on their weapons. One of them looked back nervously toward the living room, waiting for a signal. Lorenzo's voice floated out, annoyed but alert, telling them to open the door and find out who was stupid enough to disturb his house at this hour. Amara's breath caught in her throat as one of the guards unlatched the heavy lock and pulled the door open. The cold night air rushed in, and in the doorway under the dim porch light stood a tall man in a simple black jacket, his hands empty, his face calm. For a moment the scene felt unreal, like a movie leaking into real life. Amara narrowed her eyes, trying to see clearly, and then her heart did something strange. It stumbled, then raced. She knew that face, everyone did. But before she could fully process why Keanu Reeves was standing at the doorstep of a Mafia boss's mansion at 3 in the morning, his eyes lifted, and for a brief second, they met hers across the hallway. The maid in the shadows and the world-famous actor who should not have been there at all. And in that one silent moment, the look in his eyes told her that this night was not going to end the way any of them expected. The guards didn't recognize him at first. To them, he was just a tall man in worn black boots and a simple jacket, standing too calmly for someone at the wrong door in the wrong part of the city. The porch light caught on the lines around his eyes, on the way he held his hands slightly open, fingers relaxed, like he wanted the first thing they noticed about him to be that he wasn't a threat. Then one of the younger guards squinted, his mouth falling open just a little, and whispered a name under his breath like he wasn't sure if he was saying something ridiculous. Keanu Reeves nodded once, almost shyly, as if he could feel the recognition and wished it didn't matter. "Good evening," he said quietly, as though it wasn't 3 in the morning and this wasn't a house where a simple evening had never existed. "I know it's late. I'm here to speak with Lorenzo De Luca, just a conversation." The older guard recovered faster than the younger one. Starstruck or not, he knew where he worked. His eyes flicked toward the security cameras, then back to Keanu, suspicious. "No one just shows up to talk to the boss," he growled. "You have an appointment, a reason to be here." The way he emphasized reason made it clear, wrong answer, wrong tone, wrong anything, and this could get violent quickly. From her place in the side corridor, half hidden by the shadow of a tall plant, Amara watched all of this with a kind of numb disbelief. She had seen this man on old posters in the staff TV room, in action movies that the guards played on their phones late at night while she mopped around their feet. To her, he belonged to that distant, harmless universe where problems were scripted and people got second takes. Seeing him framed in the doorway of this house felt like watching a dream step into a nightmare. Before Keanu could answer the guard, Lorenzo's voice slid across the hallway like a knife wrapped in silk. "Let him in." He appeared at the end of the hall with the casual entitlement of someone who had never needed to hurry for anything. His expensive shirt was unbuttoned at the top, poker chips still clinking in one hand. The smell of whiskey followed him. When he saw Keanu standing there, his lips pulled into a slow, amused smile, more curious than welcoming. "Well now," Lorenzo said, spreading his arms a little. "Hollywood at my door, to what do I owe this honor?" The word honor dripped with sarcasm, but his eyes were alert, calculating. Men like him didn't believe in coincidences at 3 in the morning. Keanu stepped inside when the guard moved aside. He didn't flinch as the door shut behind him, sealing him into Lorenzo's world. For a second he looked around, not the way tourists do, but the way someone measures the air in a room, the distance to each exit, the faces that belong and the ones that don't. His gaze passed over the marble floors, the framed art, and then unhurried it found Amara in the shadows again. He held her eyes for the briefest moment, and this time there was something unmistakable in his expression. Recognition, concern, and something like quiet resolve. Amara's chest tightened. She pressed her back against the wall a bit more as if she could fade into it. "I'm not here as Hollywood," Keanu said, returning his attention to Lorenzo. "I'm here on a personal matter. I received a letter about your house, about someone who works here." His voice stayed calm, but each word was placed carefully, like stepping stones across a river full of unseen currents. Lorenzo's smile didn't fade, but it changed. It became thinner, sharper. "A letter," he repeated, almost laughing. "You travel across the city in the middle of the night because of a letter? You must be very sentimental." The last word was an insult disguised as a joke. The men at the poker table had drifted toward the hallway, curiosity dragging them along. They leaned against the doorframe, watching. Amara could feel their eyes bounce around the room like stones. She knew how quickly boredom in this house could turn into cruelty. She also knew that if this conversation went wrong, she would somehow end up paying for it, even if her name wasn't mentioned once. Keanu shrugged slightly, that small, humble gesture he was known for when cameras weren't rolling. "Sometimes a letter is enough," he said, "especially when it sounds like someone is trapped." He didn't raise his voice, but that one word, trapped, hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Lorenzo's gaze narrowed, following the invisible thread of implications straight to the staff corridor. His eyes settled on Amara as if he'd only just remembered she existed. "Trapped," he echoed lightly, stepping closer to her. His hand landed on her shoulder with the false softness of a man who liked to show off his control. "My employees live better than most, don't you, Amara?" The sound of her name in his mouth always felt like a chain tightening. Amara stared at a point just over his shoulder, the way she'd trained herself to do, agree enough to survive, speak as little as possible. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I'm grateful to have work." Keanu watched the way Lorenzo's fingers pressed into her shoulder, the way she didn't flinch but her jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. He also noticed something else, the thin bruise just peeking out from under her sleeve, the kind you get from being grabbed too hard and too often. His eyes softened, but his stance didn't. "You shouldn't have to say you're grateful to have work at 3 in the morning, he replied, not to her, but to the room. "Work shouldn't look like this." The poker players shifted uncomfortably. The guards looked at Lorenzo, waiting for his reaction. This was not how people usually spoke inside these walls. They either begged or bragged. This quiet, honest contradiction was new. Lorenzo laughed, but there was no humor in it. He dropped his hand from Amara's shoulder with a little push that nearly threw her off balance. "Ah, the moral philosopher," he said. "Is that your new role? Look, Mr. Reeves, people send letters, people lie. They want money, visas, attention. You should know that better than anyone. Fame is just a bigger version of this house, no? Everyone knocking, everyone wanting something." His words hit something sore inside Amara, too. She knew he wasn't entirely wrong. The world outside this house had its own cruelties. And yet something about the way Keanu stood there, unarmed and alone, told her he hadn't come for a photo or a headline or a performance. He looked tired in a way that matched her own fatigue, just carried differently. "I didn't come for attention," Keanu said softly. "I came because the letter had a name. It said, 'My name is Amara, and I don't know how much longer I can survive here.'" His eyes flicked toward her again, gentle but unwavering. "Whoever wrote it knows this house very well." The hallway seemed to shrink. Amara's breath stopped in her throat. She had never written that letter. She had never dared. Her mind scrambled through faces. Could one of the other staff have done it? The quiet gardener who never looked her in the eye, the cook who sometimes slipped her extra bread. Or Malik, but how? He didn't know this address. He barely knew the name of the city. Lorenzo's mask slipped for just a second, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. The use of her name in that letter changed things. It suggested someone close, someone inside, someone he hadn't fully frightened into silence. He turned to her sharply. "Did you write a letter?" he asked, voice still smooth, but his eyes cold as glass. "No, sir," Amara said, and this time the fear cracked through her voice. "I swear I didn't." She hadn't, but the thought that someone else had risked themselves for her made guilt burn under her skin. Even in her own suffering, she hadn't been brave enough to ask for help. Someone else had done what she couldn't. Keanu watched the panic ripple through her, and didn't rush to fill the silence. He knew enough about trauma to know that sometimes the loudest truth lived in the way a person's hands shook, not in their words. "Maybe she didn't," he said calmly. "Maybe someone else did, someone who saw what was happening and couldn't ignore it." His voice stayed respectful. He wasn't here to shout or threaten. He was here to plant something harder to uproot: doubt, conscience, the sense that someone was watching. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. For the first time, his charm felt thin, like cheap wallpaper peeling at the corners. "You come into my house," he said. "You insult the way I run it, and you think name-dropping a maid is enough to make me, what, confess, change?" He waved a hand as if swatting away a fly. "This conversation is over. I don't owe you explanations." He snapped his fingers at Amara, not even looking at her. "Coffee for our guest, now." Her body moved before her mind did, old obedience pulling her toward the kitchen. She hated that her feet knew exactly where to go, that her hands reached for the tray almost automatically. Behind her, the men started talking again in low, irritated tones. The room felt like a storm gathering, electricity building, but not yet striking. As she filled the kettle, her thoughts spun wild and fast. Someone had written her name. Someone believed her life was worth bothering a famous stranger over. Someone thought she still deserved rescue. The idea hurt more than it comforted because it woke up a part of her she had spent months trying to freeze, the part that hoped. The sound of footsteps behind her made her stiffen. She expected a guard, maybe Lorenzo, coming to warn her about what would happen if she embarrassed him in front of his guest. Instead, when she turned slightly, Keanu was standing just inside the doorway, careful not to corner her, giving her enough space to step away if she wanted. "I shouldn't be in here," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "But I didn't like the way he spoke to you." His eyes dropped to her hands. They were shaking as she reached for the cups. "You shouldn't be in this house," she answered, her voice even quieter. "It's not a place for people like you." She meant kind people. Gentle people, people who could still afford to take risks for someone else. He considered that, nodding slowly. "Maybe that's why I had to come," he said. He glanced at the door to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice further. "The letter mentioned your brother, Malik. It described the scar on his left eyebrow from when he fell out of the mango tree. It described the way he laughs when he's trying not to cry." His gaze met hers, steady. "Whoever wrote it, they know you, they know him, and they thought you'd believe me more if I spoke his name." The world tilted. No one in this house knew Malik like that. No one here had sat with him on dusty steps, sharing one plate of rice and dreams that felt too big for their small apartment. No one here had kissed that scar when he was 7 and convinced him it made him look brave. Her knees almost gave out. She grabbed the edge of the counter, heart hammering against her ribs. "How do you know my brother?" she whispered, every word scraped raw. Keanu's answer came softly, but she could hear the urgency under it. "I don't, not yet, but the person who wrote to me does. And they asked me if I ever reached you to tell you one thing. Tell Amara I still believe she's the bravest person I know. Tell her she promised she'd come back." Her vision blurred with sudden tears she had banned herself from shedding in this house. The kettle whistled loudly on the stove, an ordinary sound in the middle of something that felt anything but ordinary. Before she could ask more, before she could demand the name of whoever had dragged her pain into the light and put it in the hands of a stranger, a shadow filled the doorway. Lorenzo's voice cut through the small kitchen like a blade dipped in ice. "What are we whispering about in here?" he asked, his eyes flicking from her wet lashes to Keanu's calm face. The lightness in his tone was gone now. "I said coffee, not a private audience." His gaze hardened, and the room seemed to shrink even further. For the first time that night, there was no charm left in his expression at all, only control, threatened and ready to fight back. He stepped inside, closing the distance between them with slow, measured strides, and the air turned heavy with something poisonous. "Since you care so much about my maid," he murmured to Keanu, "maybe it's time you see exactly what happens to the people who forget this is my house, my rules." Amara's fingers tightened around the coffee cup, so hard she thought it might shatter, her pulse roaring in her ears as she realized that whatever was coming next could either destroy the tiny spark that had just been lit, or force it to blaze. Lorenzo came all the way into the kitchen, closing the door behind him with a slow, deliberate click that made the small room feel even tighter. His eyes moved between Amara and Keanu like he was weighing how much trouble each of them was worth. The soft hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed too loud, like the house itself was nervous. "You think this is a movie scene?" Lorenzo asked, tilting his head at Keanu. "You walk in, say a few noble lines, rescue the girl, roll credits." He turned toward Amara and brushed a strand of hair from her face with the back of his fingers, a gesture that pretended to be gentle and failed. "This is real life. In my life, disobedience has a cost." Amara forced herself not to pull away, even though her skin crawled. Years in this house had taught her that flinching was sometimes more dangerous than staying still. Her mind raced back to Malik, to the promise she'd whispered into his hair the night she left. "I'll come back stronger. I swear." That promise felt far away now, buried under layers of fear and fatigue. Keanu didn't step closer, but he also didn't back up. He stood like a line quietly drawn across the tile. "I know this isn't a movie," he said calmly. "In movies, we can rewrite the ending. Out here, we only get one." His eyes stayed on Lorenzo's, unblinking. "I'm not here to play hero. I'm here because you're holding a human being like she's a thing you bought." Lorenzo's expression hardened. "I did buy her," he snapped softly. "Papers, fees, travel. Do you think she flew here on dreams alone? People like you don't understand what it takes to move people across borders. Nothing is free." Those words stabbed at Amara because a part of her believed them. She remembered the man at the agency, the glossy brochure, the too sweet promises. She remembered signing forms she couldn't fully read, trusting the idea of a future more than the letters on the page. Every time Lorenzo reminded her she was paid for, the guilt knotted tighter in her chest. Keanu let the accusation hang in the air, then nodded once. "You're right about one thing," he said. "Nothing is free, not your choices, not mine, not hers." He took a slow breath. "So here's mine. I'll cover whatever you think she owes you, every cent. Tonight, you sign a release, she walks out that door with me, and this house goes back to being your secret." For a moment, Lorenzo actually looked surprised. Not impressed, just caught off guard by the simplicity of the offer. He laughed under his breath. "You'd pay for a stranger? You don't even know if she's worth it." Keanu glanced at Amara, and there was so much quiet respect in that look it almost broke her. "She's not the one with something to prove," he said. "You are, because if she really wanted to be here, you wouldn't need to lock her in with fear." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He stepped away from Amara, pacing slowly between them like a predator circling a choice. "You think this is just about money," he murmured. "It's not. Money is easy. Fear is what keeps things in place. If I let one girl walk away because some actor gets sentimental, everyone else starts thinking they can walk too." He stopped, turning to Amara with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell you what," he said. "You want to buy her? Fine, I'll give you a discount. All it costs is this." He pointed at her chest. Her voice. Amara swallowed, unsure she'd heard right. "My what?" "Ask her," Lorenzo said, staring Keanu down. "Ask her right now in front of me if she wants to leave. If she says she does, I'll let her go. You pay, I sign, she's free. If she doesn't, you walk out alone. And we both know what happens to people in this house who try to run." The room tilted around her. He had found the cruelest test, not contracts, not guns, but her own fear. Saying the words out loud felt more dangerous than any locked door. Keanu turned toward her slowly, his voice soft but firm. "Amara," he said, like her name was something fragile he was afraid to break. "Do you want to leave this house with me tonight?" Her throat closed. Lorenzo watched her with lazy interest, like this was a show he'd seen before and already knew the ending. Her hands shook so badly the coffee in the cup rippled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Years of swallowing, her needs had built a wall between her and her own voice. In that moment, the choice wasn't just about a door. It was about who she believed she was, Lorenzo's property or Malik's brave sister. Her lips trembled as she tried again, her whole body caught between the weight of terror and the thin, stubborn thread of hope that refused to snap. The silence pressed on her like a hand over her mouth. Amara could feel every pair of eyes in that house, even the ones beyond the kitchen walls, waiting to see if she would break the rule everyone lived by here: never say you want out. Her first whisper barely reached her own ears. I. The word was so small it almost disappeared. She saw Malik's face in her mind, serious and hopeful at the same time, the night before she left home. Promise me you won't let them change you, he'd said. She hadn't understood then what that would cost. Lorenzo leaned back against the counter, arms folded across his chest, enjoying the show. You see, he said to Keanu, smirking. Fear is stronger than your good intentions. She knows where she belongs. That smirk did something inside her. It wasn't just anger. It was humiliation, years of it, stacked like heavy stones on her back. It was every time he called her girl instead of her name, every plate she'd washed while fighting to stay awake, every night she'd bitten her tongue until it bled rather than scream. Her hands stopped shaking. Amara lifted her head, really looking at him for the first time in months, not as a master, but as a man who breathed the same air she did. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a country. He was just a human being who had grown powerful by convincing others they were smaller than they were. I do, she said, and this time her voice carried. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. I want to leave this house. I want to be free. The words shocked her as much as anyone else. It felt like tearing a chain straight out of her throat. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lorenzo's expression cracked, the amused mask slipping into something colder, sharper. You ungrateful little, he started, pushing off the counter. Keanu stepped between them without hesitation, not aggressive, just there, a calm, steady barrier. You heard her, he said quietly. That's the deal you offered, her voice for her freedom. Lorenzo's eyes flashed. You don't give orders in my house. I'm not giving an order, Keanu replied. I'm giving you a chance to be the kind of man you want to believe you are when you look in the mirror. That line landed harder than any insult. Amara watched something flicker across Lorenzo's face. Defensiveness, then irritation, then calculation. He snapped his fingers, and one of the guards appeared at the doorway, tense and ready. For a terrifying second, she thought this was it, that he'd drag her back downstairs, make an example of her, erase the words she'd just found the courage to say. Her knees felt weak, but she stood her ground. Keanu didn't raise his voice, but there was steel in it now. Before you do something you can't undo, he said, you should know I didn't come here empty-handed. The letter wasn't the only thing I received. He reached into his jacket and took out his phone, tapping the screen once. There's a lawyer listening on this call, he continued. There are 2 investigators who already have the letter, the names, and this address. If I walk out of here without her, this doesn't end at your front door. And if I don't walk out at all, it really doesn't. Lorenzo froze, the guard pausing behind him. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, crammed with invisible witnesses. For the first time that night, Amara saw something that looked like real fear flash through her boss's eyes, not the fear of a gun, but of exposure. Blackmail, Lorenzo said softly, from you. No, Keanu answered. Accountability, you don't like the word, I get it. But you and I both know this. If you let her go and you let me leave, I don't need your downfall to sleep at night. I just need her to be safe. His honesty disarmed in a way threats couldn't. He wasn't promising revenge. He was promising to walk away if given a sliver of decency to work with. Lorenzo's nostrils flared. He looked at Amara like she was a problem he'd miscalculated. They always think you're their savior, he told Keanu bitterly. But when you're gone, they crawl back to whoever will keep them fed. Amara swallowed hard. I would rather be hungry with my brother, she said quietly, than full in a house where I'm afraid to sleep. Her own sentence stunned her. It was the first time she had said Malik's name out loud in this house in months. It tasted like truth. Lorenzo stared at her for a long beat, then turned away sharply, hissing something under his breath in Italian. Finally, with an angry gesture toward the hallway, he barked, Fine. You want to pay for trash, pay for it. We'll draw up something simple, cash only. And when you're bored of your charity project, don't bring her back to my door. Keanu nodded once, accepting the insult without flinching. I won't, he said. She won't need you again. As Lorenzo stalked out to call his accountant, the guard followed, casting one last, confused glance at Amara, like he couldn't quite understand how a few sentences had shifted the air in a house he thought never changed. Left alone for a moment, Amara leaned against the counter, breathing hard. Her legs were shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Keanu kept a respectful distance, hands at his sides, no triumph on his face, just quiet relief. "Who wrote the letter?" she asked, voice raw. "You said they know my brother, you said they know this house." He hesitated like he wished he could soften what was coming. "A boy named Malik," he said. "He wrote to a charity I support, said his sister used to borrow pirated DVDs of my movies from a small kiosk and tell him that one day she'd be as strong as the heroes. He didn't know my address, so he sent his letter to the only name he recognized on the cover." Amara closed her eyes as tears spilled over at last. Malik, in their tiny apartment, clutching an old DVD, trying to reach someone he'd never met because he still believed stories could cross oceans. "And they gave it to you," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "They sent it to my team. Most letters never reach me. This one did." He gave a small, almost self-conscious shrug. "He wrote your promise like it was already true. I guess I wanted to see if he was right." Her chest ached with love and guilt, and something else that felt suspiciously like new strength. Before she could answer, Lorenzo's voice shouted from the next room, impatient and cold. "Reeves, bring your money. If we're doing this, we do it now." The moment of fragile peace shattered. The transaction that would decide her life was about to begin. They gathered in Lorenzo's study, a room full of heavy wood and darker secrets. Papers were spread across the desk, hastily printed by a sleepy assistant who didn't dare ask questions. The air smelled of cigar smoke and ink. Lorenzo sat behind the desk like a judge in a courtroom he owned. A thin man in glasses handed him the document, pointing to a line where his name already waited. The language was simple. A release of obligation, a transfer of whatever fake debt he claimed Amara owed. Keanu stood opposite him, a small leather bag on the floor by his feet. He had insisted on bringing cash. "I wanted there to be no excuse," he'd said quietly when Amara looked at it in stunned silence. Years of work, of movies, of interviews and flights, boiled down to an amount that could buy one woman's literal freedom. Amara stood off to the side by the bookshelves, feeling exposed and invisible at the same time. On the paper, she wasn't a person. She was the undersigned domestic worker. No name, no story, just an item on a line. "Sign there," the man in glasses told Lorenzo. "Once the money changes hands." Lorenzo didn't take the pen yet. He leaned back, studying Keanu with an expression that mixed curiosity and contempt. "This is going to make you feel better about yourself?" he asked. "You'll go home, sleep in your big bed, tell yourself you did something good, saints with private jets." Keanu's jaw worked for a second, but his reply was simple. "This is going to let her walk out your door," he said. "That's all it's going to do." "And what if I want something else?" Lorenzo's gaze slid toward Amara, then back. "Money is boring, I want a memory." His lips curled. "I want your humility. You want me to let her go? Fine, kneel right now in front of her, in front of my men. I want to remember the night I made Keanu Reeves get on his knees in my house." The room went silent. Even the assistant's pen stopped scratching. Amara's heart thudded against her ribs in horror. "No," she blurted before she could stop herself. "Don't do that, please, he's just—" Lorenzo raised a hand to silence her without even looking her way. "This is between men now," he said. "Stay in your place." Shame flared hot on her skin. That was exactly what she was fighting to leave behind, this idea that she didn't belong in the center of her own story. Keanu's eyes moved between Lorenzo and Amara, reading the anger and humiliation on her face. He took a breath, then stepped forward, not toward Lorenzo, but toward her. "Look at me," he said softly. She did. His eyes were steady, clear, not proud, not panicked, just present. "Humility isn't something anyone can take from you," he said. "It's something you choose. I came here to help you leave, not to protect my ego." Then, with no drama, no hesitation, he turned back toward Lorenzo's desk, and in front of everyone, he went down on one knee. The guards shifted uncomfortably. The assistant stared. The whole room felt off balance, like the script had been flipped and no one knew their lines anymore. Lorenzo barked out a laugh. "You see," he said, They all bow eventually. Fame, money, it's all the same when you're in front of real power. But it didn't feel like bowing, not to Amara. Keanu's posture wasn't one of fear. It was one of choice, of someone who knew exactly who he was with or without anyone's approval. He bowed his head briefly. "Thank you," he said, the words coming out calm and sincere. "Thank you for agreeing to let her go." The gratitude was not for Lorenzo's sake. It was for the outcome. And saying it out loud broke something in the air. It made Lorenzo's cruelty look small, like a child insisting he'd won a game no one else was playing anymore. Slowly, Keanu rose back to his feet. He hadn't rushed. He hadn't argued. He had simply refused to make his pride more important than her life. For the first time, Lorenzo didn't seem to know what to say. His victory didn't taste as good as he'd imagined. He snatched the pen, scrawled his signature on the paper, and pushed it toward the man in glasses. "Count the money," he snapped, nodding at the bag. As the assistant knelt to open it and start counting, Lorenzo looked over at Amara with something like irritation and unease. Her eyes weren't lowered this time. She met his gaze head-on, her hands no longer hiding behind her back. "You think this changes anything?" he muttered. "You'll always remember who owned you." She felt a familiar chill at his words, but something stronger rose up to meet it. "I'll remember who tried to," she said quietly, "and I'll remember that you failed." His mouth tightened. He opened it as if to lash out, but then the assistant spoke up, voice shaking. "It's all here, sir, every bill." The legal man slid the paper toward Keanu. "Sign here," he said. "Acknowledgement of payment." Keanu signed without flourish, handed the pen back, then turned to Amara and offered his hand. Not like a rescuer, like someone inviting a friend to step over a line with him. Her fingers curled around his slowly. The contact felt unreal but solid. Lorenzo looked away first. "Get out of my house," he muttered. "Both of you, and if she ever comes back, there won't be another price." Amara's spine straightened. "I won't be back," she said. She followed Keanu out of the study. Down the long hallway she'd walked 1,000 times as a shadow. This time, with every step, she felt the invisible chains slacken link by link. At the front door, she paused and turned back once, looking at the mansion that had stolen so many of her nights. For the first time, she didn't feel small staring at it. "I forgive you," she whispered under her breath, not for him but for herself. "But you don't own me." Then she stepped out into the cold night, the sound of the heavy door closing behind her like the final page of a chapter she had barely survived. The air outside was different. Colder, yes, but it tasted open. The long driveway that had always seemed like a threat now looked like a path. The city lights blinked in the distance, messy and alive, nothing like the controlled brightness inside the mansion. In the quiet of the car, Amara held the release papers in her lap, her fingers tracing the edge. Her name still wasn't on them, but it didn't matter. Her freedom wasn't in the ink. It was in the fact that she was sitting here at all. Keanu drove without music, giving her space to breathe. After a while, he said, "There's a safe place you can stay tonight. The charity that sent me Malik's letter, they help workers get back on their feet. Legal support, counseling, all of that. They're expecting you." She swallowed the word safe, slipping into the empty places in her chest. "And Malik," she asked, "does he know anything?" "Not yet," Keanu replied softly. "We didn't want to promise him something we couldn't deliver, but if you want, we can call him together, when you're ready." The thought of her brother hearing her voice again after so long made her throat tighten. Fear and joy tangled inside her, fear that he had changed, that she had, that the distance between who she'd become and who he remembered might be too big. But under all of that was love, steady and enduring. "I'm ready," she whispered, surprising herself. "I've been ready for a long time." He gave a small smile. "Then we'll make it happen." Time passed, not all at once, not easily, but steadily. Months later, the bell above a blue-painted cafe door chimed as a customer stepped in from the street. The place was small, just a handful of tables, plants on the windowsill, the warm smell of coffee and baked bread wrapping itself around whoever entered. The sign above the door read, "Café Malik," in simple letters. Behind the counter, Amara wiped her hands on her apron and looked up, her face lit by a kind of quiet peace that had taken time, and sleepless nights and therapy sessions and long conversations, to grow. Her scars hadn't vanished. Some days, loud laughter still made her flinch, but she slept through most nights now. When she woke up, it was to an alarm she'd set herself, not to someone shouting her name. In the corner, a young man with a familiar scar on his left eyebrow stacked clean plates, humming under his breath. Malik had grown taller, his shoulders broader, but his smile was the same one she remembered from home, the one that appeared when he was trying to be brave for her sake. He caught her watching and grinned. "You're staring again," he teased. "Customers will think something's wrong with my face." "Something is wrong with your face," she shot back, but her voice was soft with affection. "You kept my promise alive without asking me first." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "You made the promise," he said. "I just didn't let it die." On the wall near the door hung a small, framed photograph. Not of the mansion, not of the night she left, but of the day Keanu had visited the cafe quietly, no cameras, no press, just a worn jacket and that same gentle smile. In the picture, he stood between Amara and Malik, holding a coffee cup with the cafe's name on it. Underneath, in marker, Malik had written, "To the guy who answered a letter and reminded us our story wasn't over." Sometimes customers would glance at the photo and do a double take. "Is that?" they'd start, and Amara would nod, then quickly steer the conversation back to pastries and coffee. She didn't like telling the whole story to strangers. It wasn't entertainment. It was something sacred. One evening after closing, as the sun slipped low and painted the sky with soft colors, Malik leaned against the counter and asked, "Do you ever miss it? The money, the big house?" She thought about it. The polished floors, the expensive art, the endless rooms where her footsteps had never echoed with her own laughter. "I miss the version of myself who thought that was the only way out," she said, "but I don't miss the prison." He nodded slowly, considering that. "Do you think he ever thinks about you?" he asked. "Lorenz," she exhaled. "Maybe, maybe not, but I know other people in that house are thinking about leaving now. They saw someone walk out and not disappear. Sometimes one open door is enough." Outside, the bell above the cafe door chimed again as someone pushed it open. It was late for customers, but Amara turned anyway, instinctively ready with a smile. A woman stepped in, eyes tired, clothes worn, the look of someone who had worked too many nights and carried too many unspoken fears. She hovered in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. "Hi," Amara said gently. "Come in, you look like you could use something warm." The woman hesitated, then stepped inside, drawn by the light and the smell and something in Amara's voice that sounded like understanding. As the door closed, the bell chimed again, a softer echo of another bell years ago in a different house. This time the sound didn't bring dread, it brought possibility. Amara poured coffee, listened to the woman's story, and felt that old, stubborn thread of hope stretch through her chest again. But now it was stronger, woven with experience instead of only dreams. She wasn't anyone's maid anymore. She was a sister, a business owner, a survivor whose courage had been called out of hiding by a boy's letter and a stranger's decision to show up at 3 a.m. when it would have been easier to sleep. And as she handed the steaming cup across the counter, she realized that her life had become the very thing she used to search for in movies. Proof that even in the darkest houses, a doorbell can ring and everything can start to change.